It's Bree here from Undefeated, and I'm so excited to be back again with another episode in our first season. Today, we are going to be talking about receding degree ROI. So, this is the first conversation that I'll be having in this series where we're going to be interviewing someone who's quote unquote on the inside of a lot of the conversations that are happening with higher ed and tuition and all these crazy things that we're reading about in the news. This is something I've been looking forward to for a while. If you've been following along, you may have seen some of our earlier episodes where we usually talk about what it's like dealing with the aftermath as a student, as a graduate, as someone who's come out of it and had to make sense with not much intel. But this is the first time that we're really getting to hear from someone who is actually connected and can speak more to the ins and outs of the system at large and, what's being done about the student debt crisis from the inside. So, just to give you a quick preview of who I have with me today, Danny Tejada is a first generation high school and college graduate from East New York, Brooklyn. He attended Skidmore College and holds a certificate in college advising from Teachers College, Columbia University. He's been in college counseling for over 10 years, working in public, private, charter schools, nonprofits, and even his own consulting company, We Go to College. Through his consulting, he works with nonprofits and high schools on their college counseling programming, colleges on their recruitment of historically disadvantaged students, and individual families on the college app process. So, with that said, so excited to welcome to today's episode of Undefeated, Danny Tejada.
Hello. Hi,
Hey.
everyone.
So great to have you. Welcome aboard.
Thank you for
Very much
having me.
looking forward to today's dialogue. How are you?
I'm good and good. And you?
Doing good. So I know that we had a little bit of a sidebar, before we
Mm-hmm.
officially dove in here, but very looking forward to hearing your insights, and talking around the subject of the receding degree return on investment, just basically how it's tapered off in recent years. And so as you know, like this is something that really flows from my heart because I have lived it from the third party standpoint, the byproduct of a very well-meaning and
Mm-hmm.
loving family that benefited from higher ed when it functioned the way it was supposed to. But then really starting with my generation is when that started to backfire horrifically. So if you would just share a little bit about how you got into this line of work and what it entails.
For sure, for sure. Thank you. Thank you for having me on, Brianna. I really
Of course.
appreciate it. Um, I've been doing college counseling for about 10 years now. As you mentioned, first generation high school and college graduate. And I think for me, it had to do with when I went to college, I wanted to be so many different things. I thought I wanted to be a video game programmer, an actor, a journalist. I was getting very serious with hip hop journalism, interviewing artists and reviewing albums and whatnot for major publications. And senior year of college, I started to reflect on my college application journey and thought to myself, I want to be just like those people who helped me get to college. Because I seen how much college did for me, helped me grow as a person. I learned new things, learned a lot about myself. So I wanted to be able to do the same thing for young folks that look like me. And it took a long time. I graduated at a time when the recession hit, so it was difficult for me to find a job. It took a year after I graduated college to get a full-time job, and it took 4 years after graduating college to finally break into college counseling, having so many false starts. One time I interviewed for a role and they said it's part-time. Do you still want it? But I had moved out on my own by that point. There was just no way that I was gonna swing that. The time came around for me to work with the same people who helped me get into college. I heard about this role for a sister program that worked with what the program that I was in high school, Pace University Upper Bound program. And I worked for Pace University's Liberty Partnership program. So we did a lot of things together. We organized the college rep visits together, college trips together. We did our summer program together. So it was really great to see on the other side of it, um, what what those folks did for me when I was in high school. And it was really great to be sitting on the learning tree of the same person who helped me get into college. And I learned so much from him in the matter of a year that by the time I went to any formal training the year after,
Mhm.
all of the other stuff that came about in those trainings I already knew. I was at that place for about 2 years. It was a very exciting time for me. And eventually, that was 10 years ago. So down the line, went through so many different travels, went to St. Louis, Missouri for about 3 years to support my fiance while she was going to graduate school. It all culminated to returning back to New York, which is something that I didn't think was going to happen. But everything happens for a reason. That's one of the biggest things that I believe in. I was just at the right place at the right time in terms of working with the same people who helped me at Pace University. Um, Working with, going to St. Louis and having my first experience in working at a private school and relaunching my consultancy because the pandemic gave me the opportunities to be able to reach out to community-based organizations that
Mhm.
needed the programming because I knew a lot about the internet. I was a child of the internet, social media, email, and whatnot. So yeah, that's my journey in a nutshell.
Thank you for sharing that. That's,
Hmm.
a very involved context, and I appreciate you, walking us through that. I didn't realize that it, had been more than a decade in the making. So you're
Yeah,
definitely equipped with a lot of experience, that I'm
thank
excited to
you.
dive into. Um, to connect the dots, right? Because I remember our team approached you after I had seen the
Hmm.
article that you shared. I believe it was citing Miguel Cardona and, just the rules about federal money to college programs that leaves
Hmm.
grads with a ton of debt, but is
Oh
not
yeah,
raising their pay in correlation. And really, that's where the problem just inherently lies, is like it has to make sense. It has to be
yeah.
a return on investment. Otherwise, it's a gamble. So I'm curious, as far as you perceive it, what are those trends looking like in terms of maybe reversing course on that, or just kind of how you treat that when you talk to
Yeah.
folks and families that are directly impacted?
When I posted that article, I had a pretty controversial take on it because I wholeheartedly believe that the gainful employment rule should also apply to nonprofit colleges. Mostly because I believe that there are colleges out there that are not, fully servicing our students in terms of getting them set up with careers or how to, take part in the job search market and things like that, or hooking them up with different opportunities. And they graduate with a whole lot of debt and don't necessarily have the capital, the connections to be able to, get themselves started. So I think for me, a watershed moment was, of course, I graduated at a really tough time in 2009. But there
Oh,
was
very
definitely a
tough.
lot. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
There was definitely a lot of questioning at the time for me too, being first gen and moving back with my parents in the projects and not and going through that stretch of time without having full-time employment. So, you know, and then at the time too, although things have changed, I was on my way to do an internship with XXL magazine, one of the magazines that I was writing for at the time in hip hop journalism. But then the school told me I had to, well, Double XL said I had to do it for credit, and the school told me that I would have to pay for the credit. And being low income, there was no way I was going to afford $1,000 to work a non-paid internship. So thankfully, that's a thing in the past at the school. But even when I think about hopefully career services is different now, but when I think about um the lack of connection, like one of the things I always talk to my students about is find out what the career services office is like. Because the help that I was trying to get from them, I was still clueless on writing a cover letter. I radically changed my resume after talking to my mentor at Skidmore, who's talked about moving from bullet points to writing an narrative resume, and I started to get a lot more callbacks. So, for me, I see a lot about and I see there's some levels of I think a lot of colleges are dependent on Pell Grants, federal student loans to
Yes.
survive, and are not putting those funds back into the resources of the students in terms of whether it's upkeep of the dorming, whether it's the tutoring, or whether it's having quality career services, so that way when they do graduate, they can start life, right? It's very, I've seen statistics of things saying black and brown folks delaying, buying a house, delaying starting a family because of the level of massive debt that they're under.
That's exactly correct. I mean, all of that is data backed, to the tune of I believe 2/3 of Gen Zers or millennials, I would have to revisit the stat, but have
Hmm.
cited student debt as a reason for why they are intentionally delaying having kids. And,
Hmm.
even if they want to buy real estate, it's just a non-starter because they're like,
Yeah,
with what money? Like all of mine is earmarked for Sally Mae, Nelnet, Mohella, what have you. And it's just, like that's really where I get so concerned is I'm like, how are people not seeing that this is a problem? We have a
yeah,
lot of people whose desk we cross and they don't always have the nicest things to say because they're like, well, everyone needs a college education, so who cares if it costs a ton of money? And it's like, that's the problem, right? So I'm curious in terms of, with you being in your position and like being in a bit of a different vantage point than the people that I usually bring on this show, how does that strike a chord with you personally, right? And like seeing the communities that are in need and like trying to look out for those who are systemically disadvantaged, but then also advocating, for furthering their education and
yeah,
opening them up to those additional paths for once they graduate.
yeah, yeah. Um, So before I became a college counselor, I was one of those who thought everyone had to go to college. And then when I started, I thought maybe college wasn't for everyone. But now, 10 years down the line, um, I have reverted back to like everybody's go to college because the economic benefits are still there at the end of the day. It's when I think about the pandemic, for example, a lot of folks losing their jobs. And, I started to think more intentionally about talking to students about cost of living, having a job that is disaster pandemic proof, um, and attending a school that's really affordable. I've always talked about affordability since the beginning of my career.
Mm,
And, I definitely butt heads with a lot of people in the industry, even, supervisor, for instance, who was one of those folks that was like, oh, they should borrow whatever they want to be able to go to whatever school they want. And for me, it's is not, I care so much about the development of families, of the financial health of families, and not only the parents of the students, but the students themselves.
mm,
That, if I gotta talk a family out of a financial aid package, a selective school that doesn't make sense for them, and they're middle class, I definitely will do that, and I have done that, and have that conversation with them and say, hey, I don't think this makes sense for you financially, and this is why, and this is what you're gonna have to do
mm,
to have your child attend the institution, and I know that you want to do all you can for your child. Um, but you should not be in the position where you what it would could bring you financial ruin, to do so. And you always got to think about like, all right, can I do this second year, third year, and fourth year as well? Um, Thankfully, these days there are better tools out there that I wish more counselors, students, and families would use. One of my
mm,
favorite ones is college scorecard.ed.gov. And that website is able to show even average parent plus loan, which, is one of the biggest, I would probably even say predatory and confusing thing for families, because they don't necessarily know what they're getting themselves into. They don't necessarily read all the information, or the information can be confusing. Things like such as you have to start paying back the loan right away, um, or unlike the federal student loans where students don't pay their loans until 6 months after they graduate. Um, or knowing that it is adherent to your credit as well, or knowing that you could borrow up until cost of attendance, so you do that without even thinking about it, and the next thing you know, you're six-figure debt, as a parent. So um it's for me, the college scorecard, I'm able to show families. It's one thing to say, like, to tell families like, hey, a school like this is completely unaffordable. I'm able to show them why. Like, okay, if we're gonna look at, I'm not gonna, not to, throw any of the specific school on the bus, but the reality of it is one of the worst offenders of the Parent Plus loan is Spelman. So
Mm,
when we look at Spelman's data, for instance, massive debt for the Parent Plus loan. Of course, HBCUs are historically underfunded, but unfortunately, that burden falls on low income and middle income families that can't necessarily pay for the full bill. So I use college scorecard to try to steer students and parents away from certain schools, or at least try to warn them, like, hey, if you don't have the GPA and the test scores to command merit scholarships from these schools, then this is what you're gonna have to look forward
mm,
to try to help, move them away from like getting so wrapped up in certain schools and then faced with disappointment. Another instance would be an idea of going to a HBCU in Atlanta, students who were accepted to, and in my full-time role recently. And one of the things I said was, this sounds great, but the only students who should go there is the students and families who can legitimately afford to attend the school.
mm,
We wouldn't want students who are, um, I'm still going to say zero EFC, even though it's changed to student aid index, zero inspection family contribution, who don't have the GPA and test scores to command merit scholarships, to go on a plane, go to Atlanta, see the school,
right,
fall in love with the culture of it, and then the bill comes back, and I tell them as their counselor, or my fellow colleagues, and I break it down and say, this is the what the gap is like. So it's important to be preventative, and college scorecard is one of those tools that's helpful to do that, and using a school's net price calculator, although it could be a little outdated. And I also excuse me, have students take a look at their starting salaries on college scorecard as well, and the ability to pay back federal student loans. So I think between the Parent Plus loans, starting salaries, and repayment rate of federal student loans, you could try to come up with an idea of what the return on investment would be like. For example, with repayment rate, I, talk to students about, like, okay, how many are making progress on their loans? How
mm,
many of them paid it in full? Defaulted? Um, and I explain what deferred is. Like, if you go to graduate school, you put a pause on your loans or whatever. I forget the other terms too, but I try to give them a picture of, like, what a positive repayment rate looks like, what a negative repayment rate looks like, and to get them thinking, like, all right, if you go to this particular school and you graduate and you had the starting salary, excuse me, are you going to be able to pay back the loan? And
right,
then on top of that, too, I talked to them about cost of living. Let's look at the typical rent in New York City. Are you gonna still be living with your parents? Are you gonna shack up with a partner or something like that? Because the reality is in a place like New York City, it's impossible to be making, even 100,000, as crazy as it sounds, and be able to live in a suitable place and whatnot.
Mhm.
So, you
Definitely
know,
nothing luxurious.
yes, oh no, not at all.
Yeah.
So I tried to get to the view of like, all right, this is what rent is looking like now. Imagine when you become an adult. It's definitely gonna go higher. You
Hmm.
know, cost of food, entertainment, things like that. Like these are things that, parents are uncomfortable having a conversation with their children about. And I try to do that to get them to think about, all right, let's crunch the numbers a little bit. You think you're gonna be able to afford to live? If you go to this particular place or you choose this particular profession. Um, and usually that gets the wheels and gears churning, especially when um they back off a little bit from the suggestions of different colleges that I'm giving them, because I give them for a reason, in terms of funding, in terms of uh you know upward mobility and
Hmm.
whatnot. So yeah.
That's amazing work. And it's so reassuring to
Thank you.
hear that those conversations are being had because, like, that's what just alarms me for dear life is how a lot of college students, for lack of a better word, sleep through that process
Yeah,
financially. And unfortunately, a lot of the bad actors, like, that's the status quo they want to maintain is keeping them asleep at the wheel, totally uninformed, not giving any serious thought to what happens when they graduate and then it's just, oh, surprise, you owe us a ton of money, right? And so I'm
yeah,
like, the fact that you are actively talking to them through that is just really heartwarming and so elating to hear because I'm like they're just had like this cannot continue as it's been functioning. I know like we're coming up on time and these conversations always fly by in a flash.
for sure,
Just to quickly tap in, really, very, very fast because it comes up a lot to
yeah,
us and we don't have a ton of experience. Myself, our team on staff dealing with Parent Plus loans. So could you just like in a
for
30
sure.
second or so snapshot break that down?
Sure. So the Parent Plus loan, I always tell my students this. If you get to a point where you're considering a Parent Plus loan or a private loan, then that's most likely, 99.9% of the time not the school for you. So the Parent Plus loan is, as I mentioned earlier, is a loan that parents could borrow for their students up until cost of attendance. So typically, some schools will package it in a financial aid package, but not knowing that the parents still got to apply for it, and that it does do a credit check as well. So, if you don't get it, then what ends up happening, you'll probably gonna move towards private loans, which would hit you a lot higher in terms of higher interest rates, a lot more higher interest rates, um, no protections at all. If there ever is a loan forgiveness for a Parent Plus loan, I think there is somewhat, but um, it's and then also as well, if you take it out and you're successful in taking it out, you got to start paying it back right away.
Mhm.
So that's something you also gotta budget for as well. So um I think it's definitely a last resort. I don't think I ever had families who took it out. I think, oh, except for one. I only had one family do it, and that was mostly because um he was sort of like adopted and then sort of international, but recently moved to the Bronx. So there was definitely going to be some gaps in the financial aid, and they had no choice but to take out a Parent Plus loan. So
Mm.
um it with the Parent Plus loan is something that can ruin a family, in terms of being able to keep up with day-to-day costs. And it's something that lasts for a lifetime. I know people who graduated college around the same time that I did, and their parents are still paying back their Parent Plus loan now. So
Mhm.
um, so that the Parent Plus loan, look it up in college scorecard for specific colleges to get an idea of what you might be getting yourself into.
Great advice. Like you taught me a lot just now. Like I'd gotten a loose awareness over the years, but you still, hit home on some really key things that I hope people watching take away, especially people who are in the market for one, who have questions surrounding it. Like that was your golden egg, y'all, right there. So in these last couple minutes, I always like to tie every episode up with an advice and action from our guest, followed by, I'll give my closing briism just so that people have something tangible to take away. So, what would your advice and action be to sum it all up?
My biggest advice would be, as crazy as it sounds, and I can't wait to see the comments when I eventually post this. But the reality of it is this is at some institutions, having a good test score will command merit aid. So more particularly for the middle class income families, I would say invest in test prep because that's how you're gonna, get the money that you need to be able to go to certain institutions. Um, don't discount community colleges. Community colleges are a really great start, a really great way to save money. Don't discount public institutions as well. Those are the workhorses of our nation, and they definitely do magic. Most of in the CUNY system alone, the majority of the students graduate debt free, and in the CUNY system as well, City University of New York, there are connections within, companies in New York City, major companies, Google, X, whatever else. So, public institutions do great work and help raise students up from poverty and helping them maintain their certain lifestyles. And I will also say too, don't be afraid to be willing to explore certain schools. Like if you have the GPA for a certain school, go for it and make the time to write quality material for that school in terms of supplemental essays, and use college scorecard to try to determine what your return on investment might be for that particular institution.
Very helpful advice. Very helpful. I appreciate you weighing in with that. And I guess just to build off of it, my briism would be don't close yourself off. Just a lot of people tend to buy into like the hype and the status symbol that colleges can sometimes be known for. And, again, I'll say it till I'm blue in the face. My lived experience is just like a poster child example for not just trying to attach to the name brandness of an institution. So don't close yourself off, especially when there are really major financial decisions on the line as student loans, as we know, invoke. So with that being said, thank you for being today's guest. I'm so
Thank you.
excited for
Thank you.
people to sink their teeth into this episode. There's so much here. This is why I, started Undefeated is because we wanted to pass the mic to people who had more informed perspectives and can layer in different vantage points and help fill in some of the gaps that, because we don't know everything. Like we
Yeah.
know enough and we have a very loyal and amazing Prospera tribe, but conversations like these are exactly what this exists for. So thank you again for
Thank
your
you.
time today.
Thank you very much.
All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see y'all next week.